Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace. Twilight Zone.
Hey guys, Alf here. I'm back with another episode of me analyzing the Twilight Zone. I'm not quite up to the Twilight Zone yet. This will be the last episode I do before I start the actual episodes of the Twilight Zone, starting with the first one on the next video. But this one is about an episode of the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, which was a type of show where they would do like every episode would have it's an anthology show, and every episode would have a different story. But it was hosted by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. Sometimes it would just be Desi, sometimes it would just be Lucille Ball, sometimes it would be both of them. But this episode specifically, where they do the time element, was hosted by Desi Arnaz. If you don't know who Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball are, they became super famous after starting a show called I Love Lucy. Desi Arnaz was like the first famous Hispanic person, he's Cuban, in the US. And they were, that show was such a huge hit, and they became, household names after that. So they were even given this show with Westinghouse promoted it, and it was called the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Sorry, I've been sick, so my voice might sound a little off, and I'm gonna have to cut out like coughs, and I don't want to disappoint you guys though, so I won't cut out too many of the sniffles, because I know you guys love that stuff. It's like my signature sound. But yeah, this episode was called The Time Element. It was Rod Serling's first science fiction story. It premiered November 24th, 1958. And the funny thing was that he had written this a couple of years before that, and handed it into CBS, and they didn't really like it too much, so they shelved it. And it wasn't until a few years later when a new producer for the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, Burt Granite, came in, and he was looking for a story to like punch up the show. There was all just like drama stuff, and he wanted something different, something fresh, something that'll bring some sort of acclaim to the series. So he looked through all the vaults of the CBS, looking at all these shelved scripts, and he ran into Rod Serling's first science fiction story. It is called The Time Element. And he decided that they should make that, and it came out, and it worked out. It became such a huge hit that they received over 6,000 letters praising the episode from fans and stuff, and saying how great it was. And this basically led to CBS realizing, how great Rod Serling was, and especially at this point, he had written a lot of great scripts, and that he had already gained some sort of fame. People knew who he was. CBS was making tons of money from his scripts and stuff, and getting exposure. And so at this, and at this point, Rod Serling was looking to start the Twilight Zone. But this was after this episode came out is when CBS was completely convinced, yeah, maybe we should give him the Twilight Zone and see what he can do with that, Let's see how well it helps. This ended up not being the pilot for the Twilight Zone. They ended up doing, Rod Serling ended up making another story called Where Is Everybody as the first episode of Twilight Zone, and I'll cover that on the next episode when I get to the first episode of the Twilight Zone. But yeah, The Time Element, a really fun story, and I'll get into what it is now. But first, here's Desi Arnaz introducing this episode on the show.
The Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Tonight, we're going to see a story written by Rod Serling and starring William Bendix. Our story begins in a doctor's office. A patient is sitting there. He walked into this office 9 minutes ago.
So, the story is about a man called Peter Jensen, played by William Bendix, who does a fantastic job. He's kind of like a no-nonsense New Yorker. He does a great job playing the character. His dialogue is funny. The things he does is funny. But not too, the episode's not too comical, but there's things, it's charming, like a charming kind of funny. Where he just doesn't take shit, right? Getting into fights, telling people off and shit. Stereotypical New Yorker of the time. And, well, the story starts with him visiting a psychoanalyst. I don't know, they titled it as psychoanalyst. I'm going to say psychiatrist. That's basically what he is. And his name is Dr. Gillespie, played by Martin Balsam, which is in a lot of Twilight Zone episodes. Actually, a lot of there's a couple of actors in this episode that end up in a bunch of episodes of the Twilight Zone. They're like mainstays, but he's there to talk about the fact that he's having this recurring dream, and in this recurring dream, he's waking up in Honolulu the day before the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Dr. Gillespie keeps telling him it's impossible, and he starts, he brings up all these paradoxes, and he's like, see, if you did this and that, then, you wouldn't be here to do that and this, and, I think most people understand temporal paradoxes, but, I'll get more into it later. So, as he's telling the dream, you get to see the dream. Does a flashback, and you see the dream, and he's waking up in a hotel room that he doesn't know, a strange place, and he's like, where the hell am I? And he's thinking, oh, I must have gotten so drunk last night. Last thing he remembers, he's in New York, and now he's in Hawaii, and he's like, what the fuck? So he thinks he might have just gotten like blackout drunk or something, right? And woke up in Hawaii somehow. He's just confused. So at some point, he gets up, he gets dressed, he goes to the bar, and he sits down, he has a drink, and he starts talking to like the random people there. This is one really drunk guy next to him, and he says, strange thing, last night I was in New York City. Today I wake up, I'm here in Honolulu. Like, I have no idea how I got here. The really drunk guy's like, oh yeah, when I was in the military, it used to happen to me. I'd get drunk and sleep on a train and end up in another country, So then he starts talking to the bartender, and he realizes the bartender has a picture of I don't quite remember. I think it was a mayor of New York, probably from that time, not Peter Jensen's time, but the time that he's in now. So he asked the guy, like, oh, what are you, a New Yorker? And the guy's like, yeah, they talk a bit from New York, but the bartender is also another no-nonsense New Yorker guy. And instead of getting along, he kind of like is giving him a weird face and being like really off-put by this guy. So the bartender's kind of like, and eventually he meets this nice military couple that sit next to him, and it's this young guy. He's in the Navy, and then he's there with his fiance, and this guy Peter Jensen's like, oh yeah, I was in the military too, blah blah. They start talking. They have they're really nice to each other. And eventually, the Navy guy brings up that he's on the USS Arizona, and and the Peter Jensen's like, what the fuck? He's like, what are you joking me? The USS Arizona sunk. Like that shit sunk. It's at the bottom of the ocean. And the guy's like, oh, don't, the guy gets a little offended. He's like, don't talk about my ship like that. Peter's like, what? He starts laughing. He's like, yeah, you guys are fucking pulling my leg or something. But then he looks over the bar and he sees somebody picks up a newspaper, and he sees the date, and he's like, oh shit, it's 1941. And he's like, what the fuck? He ends up, it goes back and forth between him going through the dream and him talking to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist trying to help him understand that, dreams seem very real, but they're not real. It's just like your mind is trying to tell you something. And he's like, no, you don't understand. These are very real. So at some point he decides to start taking advantage of this dream, and he starts making all these crazy bets on winning horses, on sports teams, on, boxing matches. He calls one bookie and he tells them, hey, I want to bet on this boxer, that he's fighting this other boxer, and I want to bet on him. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? There's no fight with those boxers. He's like, oh, there will be. Don't worry about it. He's like, there will be. Just put the bet down. I'm betting on this person, on this boxer. They're going to fight. Trust me. I'm going to bet on it, But then, the Navy guy comes to his room, his hotel room, to ask him if he's okay because of what happened at the bar. And his wife felt bad about it and saying like, oh, I wonder if that guy's okay. So she sends her husband to go check him out. And he's like, hey man, are you all right? You were acting very weird at the bar. The guy's like, nah, I'm fine. And now that he's fully in the swing of going back in time and being like, yeah, I'm gonna enjoy this, So he's like, yeah, it's all good. And then they're like, yeah, let's have a drink later, right? And he starts, at this point, he starts feeling bad for the Navy guy because he knows he's gonna die, and it's a cute couple, they're these young cute couple, and he's like, oh man, this girl's gonna become a widow, right after she got married, like holy shit. And he's like, and so he starts thinking, I need to save these people, I need to stop Pearl Harbor from getting attacked, or at least warn that Pearl Harbor's gonna be attacked, so it won't be a surprise attack and people can get out or leave, or at least fight back, in a better capacity. But so he decides to go to a newspaper, and he goes to the local newspaper, and he tells the editor, I've got a very important thing to tell you, but I don't want to tell you yet. You have to promise me you're not gonna laugh or whatever, because obviously he has information that nobody should have. So the guy's like, yeah, all right, whatever, and he tells another guy, start writing it down. So he tells the guy the story. He's like, hey, I have it in good authority. I know that the Japanese are going to attack Pearl Harbor tomorrow morning, and we need to, this needs to get out there. We need to save these people, this and that. So the newspaper editor is sarcastically, like kind of just like an asshole. He's like, you're right, I'm gonna call the military, let's get on the president. In fact, I'm gonna get the president to get you to lead the military on this surprise attack, so because you seem to know everything about this, right? And it catches him off guard, and he's like, yeah, that's right, that's exactly what. And then he's like, oh, wait a minute. He's like, what are you, pulling my leg? He's like, listen here, buddy, and then they start arguing a bit. They get into a fight, and they get really antagonistic with each other. And eventually Peter tells the editor, if you keep talking to me like that, I'm gonna pop you one, And the editor's like, oh yeah. So he pulls off his jacket, starts rolling up his sleeves, and he's like, all right. And once he puts up his dukes, Peter Jensen just knocks him the fuck out, right? Pops him right in the face.
This is going to hurt me worse than it does you, Mr. Jensen. Believe me.
I believe you, Mr. Gibbons.
Then it skips forward a bit, and he's woken up by a doctor, right? And you see the editor has a black eye now. There's another guy there, and they basically say that it took like the whole entire newspaper staff to hold this guy down. He was basically beating everybody up. But yeah, they got him. He's telling the doctor now, he's like, you guys got to listen to me, blah, blah. They're like questioning him. They're like, who's the president? And he's saying the president from 1958, right? And then he's like, oh shit, and they're like, who did you say? I think he says Eisenhower. And he's like, Eisenhower, who the hell's that? And then he looks at the wall and he sees a picture of the president at that time, which I think was FDR. And he's like, oh no, it's FDR. And then he was like, but who's the guy you said? Eisenhower, who the hell is that? And then one of the other guys, newspaper guys, knows who Eisenhower is, and he was like, Eisenhower, he's like, that guy, he's he's like a general or something for the army in Fort whatever, in whatever state. But obviously we know that he becomes president eventually. These people don't know. They're like, how the hell, what's this guy talking about, But eventually he ends up leaving. They don't believe him, obviously. Except for the one guy that was taking down the notes. He actually ended up drawing a little plane attacking a battleship. And, and you kind of get the feeling, he doesn't admit to believing him, but you kind of get the feeling he kind of believes them. Like, he kind of feels like, hey, this guy might be telling the truth. But, in the end, nobody fucking believes him. He ends up going back to the bar because he was, the Navy guy told him to meet him there. At this point, I'm going to tell you guys that I've already told you like basically half the story. And I'm going to do this with the Twilight Zone episodes. I'm going to tell you like the first half of the story, and then I'm going to give you a spoiler warning. And the rest of this I'm going to say is a spoiler. I guess I'll write spoiler on the screen so you can fast forward until it doesn't say spoiler anymore. But either way, I'll figure something out. But yeah, spoilers from now on. So he goes back to the bar. He starts talking, they have a nice, he meets the couple again. They have a nice city, they sit down, they have a nice drink, they have a good time, they're getting happy. But then all of a sudden, again, he feels bad for them. He doesn't want them to die. He's like, wow, these are such nice kids, and he's going to die, and he's going to leave her alone. And it's really sad to him. So he's like, listen, you have to get out of here. You have to abandon your post because you're going to die, and the wife's getting upset. So then the young Navy guy's like, hey man, if you keep upsetting my wife, I'm going to have to knock you the fuck out, Obviously not in those words, but then they're like, fuck this. They grab their drinks and they walk away from him. But he gets up and he grabs the woman. He's like, listen, please, you have to tell him that he can't go to his job tomorrow. And, grabbing her obviously is going to piss off the Navy guy more. So he turns around and pops him. Wow.
He may not be alive tomorrow.
And then, other people get into it, and he's like trying to yell at everybody in the bar, listen to me, you're all gonna die, there's gonna be attack tomorrow, Japan's gonna attack. The New Yorker bartender's like, all right, I had enough of this guy, and he comes up and he pops fucking Peter too, and he's like, you guys want to sing a song? And he starts singing these songs that came out after the Pearl Harbor attacks to commemorate Pearl Harbor. And he starts singing these songs, and he's like, you're all going to be singing these songs after tomorrow. Like, any of you that live, you're all going to be singing these songs after tomorrow. And, they're all looking at him like he's crazy, but he eventually leaves. Then, we skip back to another part with the psychiatrist again talking to him. The psychiatrist is telling him, it's impossible for you to travel through time. He gives an example of a time paradox, which is kind of like the grandfather paradox. He's like, if I go back in time and I'm doing stuff there and I end up dying, then I would have never, then I never went back in time. I wouldn't have existed here when you here in the present. I wouldn't be here because I'm dead back, years ago. So the guy's like, listen, it's true. This is real. He ends up saying that he remembered the couple, the Navy guy's last name and where he was from. I think it was like Oklahoma or something. So, and the name of the town. So he looked it up in a phone book and he saw the last name, he saw the town, and there was somebody in the town with the last name, and he called them. And it ends up being the guy's mom. So he asked him, he's like, hey, I'm a friend of so-and-so. We were in Honolulu together. I was wondering, if he's around. And so, he ends up getting disclosed that the dude died and the wife died too on that day of the Pearl Harbor attack. So this is kind of confirming that what he's experiencing is real. He's like, holy shit. So as he's telling the story to a psychiatrist, he ends up actually falling asleep again. And he wakes up again. And now he's in the next day. It's the next morning. And he's like, why won't anybody listen to me? I'm trying to help you guys. I'm telling you guys. And he hears the planes. And now there's these Japanese planes. He looks out the window of the hotel room. There's these Japanese planes flying up ahead. And he's like, oh my God, I tried to tell you guys. He's screaming out the window, basically. Why wouldn't anybody listen to me? I told you guys. But then a second wave of planes come and it shoots the hotel. And the bullets go through the window and kills Peter Jensen. Now we flash forward to Dr. Gillespie's office, where we look over where Peter Jensen was on the couch laying down. There's nobody there. And now Dr. Gillespie's like, kind of confused. Like, what is he doing in the office? Earlier that day, he said he was, earlier in the episode, I forgot to mention this, but earlier in the episode, he was talking about how it was his day off. He was supposed to go play golf until this guy called him and said, I need to talk to you. And he basically opened his office for him. He didn't have any other clients that day. And, this leads to him being really confused as to what he's doing in the hotel room, right? Peter Jensen disappeared, as the psychiatrist was saying before about time travel. He basically wasn't there. He never existed. So he doesn't understand what he's doing there. He looks at the ashtray, which, throughout the whole episode, they're smoking cigarettes. They're both smoking cigarettes and clipping it off, and the ashtray's building up. But as he looks at the ashtray now, it's completely empty, and he's like, all right. But it's kind of like he kind of has a hint of remembering what was going on, but he doesn't. So, he decides, well, I guess I better leave. I don't know what I'm doing here in the middle of the day, way past the time he should be going out to play golf. So he's probably not going to do that anymore. But he leaves and he goes to a local bar to have a drink real quick. And he orders a drink, and then he looks up and he sees a picture behind the bartender. And he's like, who's that guy? He sees him, he looks very familiar. And he's like, who is that guy? And he looks over and he looks at the wrong picture first. And he says, oh, this guy, this is blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, the picture on the left. And he's like, oh, that's some guy that used to work here at the bar. I think his name was Peter Jensen. And he's like, yeah, and he used to be a bartender here. I think he died in Honolulu or something during Pearl Harbor. And and then you look at Gillespie and he's like, like he kind of has a hint of remembering, and it's all like very familiar, but he doesn't remember. He has his drink and leaves, and that's the end. So, the episode's very charming. It's very well written. There's definitely loopholes in the time travel thing. He was time traveling back at his age, so he wouldn't die and not have existed. He would just have disappeared from time traveling at that moment, and really Gillespie would have been like, where did he go? He was just on that couch. And he'd remember all of that, right? Because this guy's life, he did exist between 1941 and 1958. It's just after 1958 he disappeared back to 1941, right? So that's a big loophole. But I mean, you forgive those things, right? This is Rod Serling's first time he delved into science fiction, and it's a really cool story. I think if you watch it, it's an hour long, maybe less. It's probably like 40 something minutes long. It's an hour long with the bookends, which is, Desi Arnaz introducing it, and then him doing they do a little gag at the end with Desi Arnaz, and then Lucy shows up and all that. But yeah, it's a really great episode. You guys should watch it. You can find it on YouTube very easily. Just type the time element and it'll come up. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if this format is cool. Is it cool for me to like explain the first half of a story, give you a spoiler warning, and then do the second half? Does that seem right? Yeah, some of you guys let me know. I also want to go into, like with the Twilight Zone episodes, go to analyzing it a little bit and what it could mean, what the stories could mean. This one's kind of easy. It's just a basic science fiction episode. But I think it kind of, which gets touched on later on in other Twilight Zone episodes as well, is the idea that you can't change, things are out of your control. You can't change things, right? And you kind of have to accept that things are out of your control. Just like he keeps going back to the day before the Pearl Harbor attack, and he wants to change it, but he can't. Nothing changes. It's all basically the same. And no matter what he does, nobody will believe him. There's nothing he can do about it. So it's basic. So I feel like the story is basically a way of saying, hey, there's things that are out of your control that you can't do anything about. We just have to accept them and move forward. So I think that's about it. That about concludes this. Yeah, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if this format's cool, if this is the way I should do it, or if you have any other ideas. I'm not really sure. You might give me an idea that I like, and we'll run with that. So we'll figure it out. Come back next time when I do the first episode of the Twilight Zone, the actual pilot and first episode, called Where Is Everybody? Can't wait to get started on that. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.
As you can see, the pendulum has stopped. We wonder if Pitt Jensen did go back in time, or if he ever existed. My personal answer is that the doctor has seen Jensen's picture at the bar sometime before and had a dream. Any of you out there have any other answers? Let me know.